Sure.
Sir.
Hello? Okay. How's that? Better? Good. Thank you, Councilman, for introducing me. I appreciate that. My name is Stephen Nocera. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Chief Administrative Officer for the Town of Stratford. I'm going to be presenting tonight. I look forward to. I just want to say thank you to all the public that came out tonight. It's always nice to see public engagement, especially on matters that affect our town. I do want to start by introducing a few people. We do have the mayor with us tonight, Mayor Harkins. Thank you for being here. We have the executive director of the Greater New Haven Water Pollution Control Authority, Sidney Holbrook, right here. His CFO from Greater New Haven, Gabe Varga. Their director of operations, Gary Zarella. From Arcadis, one of our independent consultants, Isabel Schroeder. Steve Siegel from Tithe and Bond, the town's WPCA consultant. And as well, John Staffstrom and Aaron Bowman, both from Pullman Conley, some of the attorneys who have helped negotiate this proposed regionalization. So thank you all for being here, and let's get to it. By way of background, in 2012, after a large sewer use fee increase of $95, the town council had asked the administration to look into ways of mitigating such large fee increases going forward. The administration examined a number of these proceedings and determined that regionalization with the Greater New Haven Water Pollution Control Authority was the best solution for the town. This presentation is meant to explain why. Some of the options we did look at included outright privatization, having a private utility take it over. That didn't really work, and largely because it was simply it didn't allow for enough control of the town's rate. We felt important. I'm sorry, you can't hear me? Is this better? All right. Sorry, I don't usually do this. I appreciate your cooperation. We felt that it was important that the town have say in its rates and the townspeople, as they currently do, be able to give feedback and input on what the rate is going to be going forward. Privatization did not accomplish that. One of the other options we looked at was a leasing operation, having the town retain the ownership, but a private operator come in and run the facility in order to achieve synergies. This was not a valid option because of our collective bargaining agreements, and it just didn't work for the town. And lastly, we looked at creating a new region with other towns, neighboring our neighbors to see if there was a cooperation available. This was not an option simply because it was too much of a startup to get the legislation, to have another regional entity, to go through all the startup costs and the creation, and then you have the, trying to figure out how to do that. So we looked at that and said, well, why would we go through all of that when we have a region that we can join and wants to partner with us? As an overview of the Town of Stratford Water Pollution Control Authority, I'm sure many of you know that the facility is located on Birdseye Street toward the end. It is manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The facility presently is designed to hold 11.5 million gallons of sewage or effluent per day, according to the parameters of Connecticut Department of Energy and, they added a syllable, the Energy and Environmental Protection, as well as the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Just as a quick overview of some of the things that we have that are included in the system, we have 189 miles of sanitary pipes. There are 13 pump stations, and this facility does service all 51,000 people in the town. Just a quick overview of the Greater New Haven facility. You can see that it's made up of 4 constituent municipalities, including New Haven, Hamden, East Haven, and Woodbridge. And I won't go through all the stats, but there are their stats for their various things, including pump stations, plants, etc. In 2005, the region was created under Connecticut General Statute, and it provided that 2 or more towns could collaborate to create a region. As I mentioned, there are 4 currently. If approved, Stratford would be the 5th. One of the most important points to recognize is that Greater New Haven is a similar governmental body that just as Stratford is. They are subject to FOIA laws. They are also subject to all the rules and regulations that our town's WPCA is subject to. Going forward, that's important because, as we mentioned, part of this deal was to ensure that the same things existed under regionalization that we have with our WPCA today. Some of our challenges, and one of the reasons that the council asked the administration to look at this, include the projected rates going forward. I don't know if this slide's hard to see, but I'll go through it a little bit. Our current rate is $400. The proposed rate for FY 15-16 next year, starting in July, is proposed at $460, or a $60 increase. And then going forward, given the capital needs that we have, we're looking at seeing $25 increases year over year after that. Part of the reason for those increases is that while we did expend $62 million on upgrading our plant in 2008, we anticipate an additional $8 million of capital needed over the next 5 years. And that's to address the aging infrastructure, those 189 miles of pipe that we have in the ground that are outliving their useful life capacity. Those $25 rate increases that I mentioned just now represent a 6.7% increase per year per household year over year for the next 5 years. And that does unfortunately assume the $60 increase that's proposed in this upcoming budget year. This slide is sort of the answer to why do this. If you look at the blue trend line, that is our, if we do nothing. That is if Stratford stays the same, we don't regionalize, and we keep the status quo. These are the rates that the residents can expect to see. If we do regionalize, however, working with New Haven and looking at the synergies and the economies of scale that they can provide, while the fees do increase, you can see that it's a rate stabilization. The difference between these 2 points over 5 years is an estimated $5.4 million saved by our ratepayers in 2020. That's $5.4 million back into your pockets, and or if we do nothing, it's $5.4 million that you folks here will have to expend. We think this is a salient point and one of the main reasons that we're presenting this today. I apologize, I'm just going to move my slides here. Additional benefits to the regionalization. Regionalized entities are better equipped to provide area-wide leadership and in government's framework, program diversity and capacity, and a long-term strategic focus on customers, all at a lower cost. As again, that refers back to the slide that I just mentioned. They're going to be able to have the breadth and depth to do this on a globalized scale, looking at things in a broader perspective, and save money overall. The proposed transfer of the wastewater assets, which are not a core function of government, and what I mean by that, typically your core functions of government, you think of public safety, plowing roads, fighting fires. Having the proposed transfer of the water assets to the region will enable the town to focus more on those core governmental services we've all come to expect. Additional benefits include the removal of wastewater debt. Our current wastewater debt stands at $37 million. That's what's left on our books from the 2008 upgrade of $62 million. That debt represents 10% of the town's bonded indebtedness. This is important because in one transaction, we're able to remove 10% of the town's bonded indebtedness. The rating agencies are going to like this, and it will help our bond rating. Additionally, this will remove liabilities from the town. Those 189 miles of sewer pipes that I mentioned, those are going to be breaking over time, and it's our responsibility currently to fix those and to transform them back to useful pipes. This transaction would alleviate that responsibility. It also removes regulatory compliance and permitting issues. Connecticut Deep is coming out with new regulations every day. One of them, they have these kind of silly nicknames. One of them is CMOM. It basically says that we're going to have to put a bunch of money into our pump stations to upgrade them to capacity and to do certain things. That regulation will no longer be burdened on the Stratford WPCA, as the region will be taking care of those compliances. This transaction will also allow for the town to have a role in the region's governance. We will have 2 members on a regional board that will consist of 11 members, Stratford included, and it's important to note that no municipality maintains a majority on the board. There are no people that have a strict majority on the board. So we will have to work with our partners, and we will be able to say what the rate is going to be going forward. This is important because, as we mentioned, people had told us that if we're going to do something like this, they want to have a role in the government. They want to say what their sewer rate is going to be. And this transaction will provide for that. In fact, more so than any other utility that you currently pay: water, gas, oil, etc. Additionally, the town will receive compensation for the sale of the assets. We will receive a lump sum payment up front of $16 million. I'm going to walk through the deal terms on a different slide, so I won't go into the detail now. But we will receive a lump sum payment at the outset of the transaction. And additionally, we'll receive Payments in lieu of taxes, that's pilot for shorthand. We will receive the first year $200,000. The following 10 years, the town will receive $420,000, and then after that 10th year, we will receive $400,000 in perpetuity. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, the value of money gets less over time, and there is a provision to change that in the out years, but just broad strokes, that's going to be the pilot schedule for now, which I should add is very generous. None of the other towns except New Haven's are getting anywhere near that. In fact, we're getting multiple times more than some of the towns, including, for example, Woodbridge. What are we regionalizing? As part of the regionalization, what we're regionalizing is with the town and the Stratford WPCA assets will include the plant, all of the 13 pump stations, the equipment and infrastructure, those pipes and obviously some of the vehicles and things that are needed to run the plant, the real property or the real estate that's related to the WPCA operation, and then all other assets related to the operation of the Stratford WPCA. And the operation in its entirety would be transferred to Greater New Haven. The terms of the regionalization. Stratford will, as I mentioned, receive $16 million as a purchase price. We'll receive that at the outset. We will also get those payments in lieu of taxes that I just mentioned, that $400,000. We will also be able to transfer and be released from that $37 million on our books from clean water debt that's left over from the 2008 upgrade. We will have the 2 seats on the regional board that I mentioned. And additionally, we will retain the ability to collect sewer assessments when people hooked into the system. The reason for this is we paid from the town dollars to put the sewers in. So if someone new wants to hook into the system, it's only fair that the town be paid back for those monies. When you hook into the system, you get assessed over a period of years, and that those payments will be retained by the town of Stratford. The Greater New Haven maintains a separate Stratford user rate based on an annual cost of service study. This is important. One of the things we're going to be doing to ensure that Stratford dollars stay in Stratford is doing an annual cost of service study that's solely based on the expenses that are dealt with here in the town. So that all of your user fees will be funding your user rate in Stratford, not going somewhere else, for example, New Haven or East Haven. They will remain in town. A number of questions have come up about affected employees. We, at the goal of this outset, the mayor instructed us, we do not want to have anyone negatively impacted by this transaction. Our goal is to make sure that no one is negatively impacted. Employees will have 3 options. Some of them will be offered employment with Greater New Haven, which is also an AFSCME union, which is what the current employees fall under now. Others will remain with the employee of the town, others in a different division of public works, parks, for example. And lastly, those who are of age will be able to retire if they elect to do so, with all of their accrued benefits intact. None of this will be affected in any way. It's also important to note that Greater New Haven maintains similar salaries and benefit packages as the current setup at the Stratford Water Pollution Control Authority. I want to go back one second. I forgot to mention, under regionalizations, those employees that are taken on by New Haven will have greater access to opportunities such as training and employment actions to grow their career and be more involved in these sewer operations. The benefits to the users include that the customer rate will be stabilized and lower over the long term than it otherwise would be, and that again refers back to that graph that I showed. We're going to provide for a seamless transition from Stratford WPCA to Greater New Haven. One of the ways we're going to be doing this is the town will be retaining the ability to bill people for 2 years, which will be compensated for. That's important because one of the things we wanted to make sure was that no one's bill came from a different source or a different method. So the town, for the first 2 years, will be continuing the billing so that people see that it's a similar operation and it can be started from the get-go. Additionally, the town's customers will benefit from an increased efficiency through a focus on the environment and water quality issues, as well as integration and upgrading of systems. Again, with the ability and a larger pool to maintain economies of scale, we will be able to have a focus on not only environmental matters, but also efficiencies, which will create the savings that I mentioned earlier. The governance structure will provide for transparency and fair and equitable rates for all customers. One of the things I want to reference here is that we did our due diligence. We called the other towns to make sure that this was something that they enjoyed being involved in, not something that they regretted later. We found out, and I'm sure many of you read in the Stratford Star recently, that many of the other towns love this experience. They think this is, as the mayor of Hamden put it, a home run for his town. And we'll have copies of that article if anyone wants it. Additionally, as I mentioned, this has been in existence since 2005. This region has existed for 10 years, and it has worked well and performed great for a decade. I think that's a pretty important point. Lastly, Greater New Haven's ability to fund capital projects will provide for not only improved service, but increased water and environmental protection for our watershed. This is a really important point. We want to make sure that we all live here, we all grow up here, that our environment's protected and maintained to the level it is now, if not better. And building off of that, I want to go into some more environmental benefits. The Greater New Haven's East Shore plant, as well as Stratford WPCA's plant, both discharge into the Long Island Sound. So there's a synergy here that means that we'll be able to focus more on coordinated environmental efforts. Additionally, having one larger environmentally focused entity will provide for increased scrutiny and greater fairness in terms of regional environmental protectionism. The Greater New Haven has in-house staff that are equipped to manage environmental and regulatory issues and can do so with the economy of scale that is unachievable by Stratford alone. And they have a centralized permitting system which will help create those synergies. All the revenues, as I've mentioned before, that have derived from Stratford will go directly to benefit Stratford users and maintain and improve the system and enhance Stratford's environment. Lastly, under regionalization, the first capital project that we endeavor as a regionalized entity will be available to have an extra 5% clean water fund from the Connecticut Deep to go into that project. Again, with greater access to funding will come the ability to invest in Stratford's environment. And I think it's important to recognize that if Connecticut Deep is monetarily incentivizing people to do these regionalizations with providing grant dollars, that speaks to how much they are in favor of regionalized water authorities. Next, the process. Oh, yes. The process under which we contemplated this transaction and negotiated it were conducted with the utmost concern of Stratford and its residents. Some of the things that we did to ensure that the residents are protected in this endeavor were to have the cost of service study performed by an independent consultant, namely Arcadis, who's here to speak today. And we've involved numerous town departments, including the WPCA itself, Public Works, Finance, my office, purchasing, engineering. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to find a department that didn't have a say in this, and that was important. We wanted to vet this out as best we can with our own experts that are in-house. We also hired an expert consultant who's an expert in the wastewater pollution control field. His name is Stephen Kellogg, and while he couldn't be here tonight, I bring him up because it's important to reference that Mr. Kellogg is a 25-year resident of Stratford who has over 40 years in this field. He did submit for the council's purview a record for the statement, and I thought I'd read a couple of the points that he mentions in it. He states, and I'm quoting, "I completely concur with the decision by Stratford to become a part of the regional wastewater treatment system. Regionalization brings numerous advantages to the town, including a more stable rate, economies of scale in operations, purchasing, as well as shared expertise." Lastly, he states, "The purchase price paid for the assets, along with the assumption of the debt, represents, in my opinion, a very good deal for the town of Stratford." And lastly, we hired expert independent counsel to help us negotiate this transaction. One of the reasons we did this was to provide for any conceptual agreements that we had with Greater New Haven be reflected appropriately in the asset purchase agreement, which is available online and is posted on the town's website. Oh, and I should mention, I'm sorry. As I mentioned before, our expert legal counsel is John Sapstrom and Aaron Bowman from Pullman & Conlon. Lastly, I wanted to go through a couple of commonly asked questions and provide the actual answers to them. The first question is, does the state support regionalization? The answer is yes. As I alluded to earlier, the Connecticut Deep supports this transaction. In fact, the existence of Greater New Haven as a regional entity since 2005 is not only proof, but it's precedent of this. Number two, will Stratford residents pay the debt of New Haven or other towns, giving Stratford an even greater debt load? The answer is no, absolutely not. In fact, Based on the terms of the transaction, the Stratford ratepayer will not share in the debts of other participating towns and will have a separate user rate for Stratford costs alone. This transaction, as I mentioned before, will decrease our town's bonded indebtedness by 10%. Anyone saying anything else is inaccurate. True story. Will my home be foreclosed on if I don't make my sewer payments? The answer is possibly. If you don't pay your sewer payments, just as now, with the Stratford Water Pollution Control Authority, you may be foreclosed on. That's true today under status quo. If no regionalization happens, it's true then, and it's also true under regionalization. It's important to know that the idea of foreclosure is not meant to take people's homes. It's an enforcement action. If you don't pay and you make restitution, those proceedings stop and you retain your home. Is this privatization? No. Regionalization is completely different from privatization. In fact, legally speaking, Greater New Haven is another governmental authority. They're subject to FOI, they're subject to all the transparency requirements that the town of Stratford, as well as the Stratford WPCA, are subject to in the current. So this is completely different. Greater New Haven has no corporate interests, they have no stockholders, they are not a corporation. And as I mentioned before, we did look at, is privatization something we should be looking at? And the answer came out invariably, no, we should not. Lastly, what controls will there be over the Stratford user rate? The Stratford user rate will be determined, as I mentioned before, by the independent cost analysis, which will show what does it cost to run the Stratford plant, how many users do we have, and what should the rate be? That's all it's going to reflect, as it does now. The Stratford user rate will be approved by the board, which we will have 2 seats on and a say in. And as I mentioned before, it's more of a say than you're going to have in any other utility bill that you get from the village. Lastly, and I think this is the great question, why are you selling a facility when it was upgraded in 2008? Or really, why do this? Why do this at all? Why think about it? Why contemplate it? And the answer is that while the WPCA plant was upgraded in 2008, we did not upgrade the infrastructure, those 189 miles of pipes. Interestingly enough, 50% of them are as old as 40 or 60 years. The average useful life of a sewer is 50 years. So we're going to start seeing our infrastructure be degraded and erode and break down, and we're going to have to start paying to replace it. And that's one of the main drivers of why sewer rates keep going up every year. This regionalization answers that and achieves the savings and allows us to do it at a lesser cost to the ratepayers, i.e. you folks in this room. That's all I have for this evening. I know Councilman Kubik is going to be asking people to speak, and we'll go from there. So I thank you all for your time, your patience, and your cooperation. I'll also turn the lights back on for you.
We're going to start the local hearing.